Hi everyone, on today's episode of Red Pill Garage I'll be replacing a rear wheel bearing hub assembly on a 2007 Honda Accord Euro. Have a listen to this. The tools required for this job are brake cleaner, WD-40, Loctite, hub buffing pad, a torque wrench, hammer, combination spanners, screwdriver, impact driver, 1/2 inch and 3/8 ratchets, impact gun, and of course don't forget the safety glasses. Check this out, the wheel movement caused by the wheel bearing. Way too excessive, there shouldn't be any movement whatsoever. Okay, the next step is I'm going to remove the wheel, and if you're doing this job at home, remember safety comes first. Make sure you have jack stands under the car. Hub assemblies are maintenance free and non-serviceable units that are preset, pre-greased and pre-sealed from the factory. Okay, the next step, to remove the caliper, you will need a 14mm ring spanner for the caliper bolt and a 17mm open end spanner for the caliper guide pins. Once you've cracked them both loose, you can use the 14mm ratchet spanner to remove the caliper bolts. Next, you'll have to remove the handbrake cable support bracket bolt to remove the caliper off the disc. Otherwise, the caliper can't be removed. Once removed, take note of the inner and outer brake pads, as they must go back in the same position as they came from. So in other words, the outer pad must be put back on the outside of the disc and the inner pad on the inside of the disc. This is really important to remember. Once the caliper and brake pads are out of the way, you'll need to remove the two 14mm bolts holding the caliper cradle bracket. Check out this noise from the wheel bearing. Okay, next, the disc must be removed, and to do that the disc retaining screws must be removed first. You'll need an impact driver and a hammer, as these screws can be fairly tight. It is important not to damage the head of the screw, so press the impact driver fairly tight onto the screw before hitting it with a hammer. Next, we're going to locate and remove the wheel bearing hub mounting bolts. You can use a 1/2 inch ratchet with a 14mm socket or just a 14mm ring spanner. Then to speed things up, you can use a ratchet spanner or even an air ratchet if you like. Once you've removed all 4 hub bolts, the hub and wheel bearing should come straight out. Okay, this next step is very important. We need to make sure the old and new parts are identical, so the new part fits perfectly onto the car. Sometimes manufacturers like to make slight variations to parts from year to year. This can be a real problem once you have installed the part, which could get damaged in the process and then you'll be stuck with it. So these are the simple checks I like to do before installing the bearing hub assembly onto the car. Before installing the bearing hub assembly, make sure the rubber O-ring is fitted to the new part, as this will stop any dirt and water from getting in behind the bearing hub unit and also protect the ABS sensor. Make sure both surfaces are clean before mounting the unit. If there were to be any small stone on either surface, it could cause the bearing hub assembly to crack. This step is really important and should not be missed. After all, these parts aren't cheap. It's always good practice when doing these kind of jobs to remove any rust or grime buildup on the threads. If you don't have a wire wheel, you can also use an ordinary wire brush to clean the threads. Don't forget to wear your safety glasses. Remember, safety first. Now it's time to fit the mounting bolts to the bearing hub unit. But before I do that, I like to use thread locker on applications like this. Now thread locker is anaerobic, meaning without oxygen, so it cures in very tight gaps or in the absence of oxygen. Your standard thread between a nut and bolt has approximately 15% metal engagement. Also, it stops corrosion on the threaded surface area where the thread locker makes contact. You can also use a medium strength thread locker in this application. Okay, when tightening these 14mm bolts, I like to first snip up the bolts, then do a second pass to tighten them, and then a final third time to tighten them. Okay, this step here is important as we need to make sure both mating surfaces are clean from any grit. This can lead to one of the main causes for brake pedal pulsation, a warped disc brake rotor. To clean the surface area on the inside of the disc, you can use a hub cleaning tool, or just an ordinary emery cloth paper will also do the job. And don't forget, finish it off with brake cleaner. Now it's time to mount the disc rotor to the hub, but make sure you line the screw holes on the disc rotor with the mounting holes on the hub. This is really important as it can easily be missed, causing part of the job to be pulled apart again to remove the disc rotor for correct fitment. Once the disc is correctly mounted to the hub surface, you'll need to use an impact driver to tighten the screws up against the hub. If you didn't have an impact driver, you can use a standard Phillips screwdriver, but make sure you use medium strength thread locker, as using a screwdriver will cause these screws to eventually work loose. Okay, the next step in this process is to clean both sides of the disc rotor surface to get rid of any grease, as not to contaminate the brake pads. Alright, the noise is gone. Another successful job. Next, I'll fit the brake caliper cradle bracket, then make sure you apply thread locker to the cradle bracket bolts, and then tighten. Now it's time to fit the brake pads. Make sure to fit the pads to the correct sides of the rotor. This is really important. The brake pad with the wear warning indicator is to be fitted on the inside of the disc rotor. Then we can go ahead and fit the brake caliper. Also apply thread locker to the caliper bolts, then tighten. When tightening the 14mm bolts in the caliper, make sure to also use a 17mm open-end spanner to hold the guide pin from spinning. This could cause the caliper bolt not to be correctly tightened and work its way loose. Once the caliper bolts are tight, make sure you have a little bit of side-to-side movement on the caliper, as to make sure it's not binding, and also spin the disc rotor freely. If the disc rotor is hard to spin, then the brake pads may not be fitted correctly. Okay, we can now tighten the handbrake cable 12mm bracket bolt. We're almost done now. Let's just have a quick visual inspection as to make sure none of our bolts have been missed. Before mounting the wheel, it's always good practice to lubricate the wheel studs. Some mechanics like to use grease or any seized grease, but I prefer not, as I have found over the years you tend to get a lot of grit stuck in the grease, causing premature thread wear and damage. Whereas WD-40 doesn't hold grit and gives it a clean and protective finish. Also, when spraying WD-40, always spray in a downward aim and only gently press the trigger as to stop any spray hitting the face of the disc rotor. Okay, now it's time to torque up the wheel nuts. Set your torque wrench to 108 Newton meters and begin to tighten in a crisscross action or tighten opposite nuts. Never go in a clockwise or a counterclockwise direction. Once your nuts are tight, place one hand in the 12 o'clock position and the other hand at the 6 o'clock position. Push and pull opposite sides. There should be zero movement. And that's how you replace a wheel bearing hub assembly on a 2007 Honda Accord Euro. If you enjoyed this video, please give me a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button for new videos. Thank you for watching.